Good evening, I'm DK Roster. Welcome back to the TTT News. NGC Bocas Lit Fest was a virtual affair celebrating its 10th outing from September 18 to 20. Now, Dr. Merle Hodge's Crick Monkey was celebrated with a reading done by the four individuals joining us: Mandisa Granderson, actor and voice talent; Isoke Edwards, actor and voice talent; Conrad Parris, actor, broadcaster, voice talent; and Elisha Efua Bartels, writer, director, actor, dancer, and voice talent. We want to thank you for joining us. And Elisha, I want to start off with you, please, to give us the distinction between actor and voice talent.
The distinction between actor and voice talent. For me, voice work is part and parcel of acting, but a lot of the time it helps to distinguish for other people that when you say voice talent, you're talking about doing voiceover work, whether it be for ads or voicing over for animation or documentaries or things like that, where you are not seen and only your voice is working. But sometimes if you just go with actor, people don't realize that that's one of the things that you do too, you know?
All right, thank you so much, because we want to have it out there so people say, okay, well, this is what I'm seeing, but we have that context now. Now, I want to roll between Isoke, Mandisa, and Conrad, thank you, asking for the characters you played and your thoughts on them. So we start off with Isoke, please.
I played, oh gosh, guys, help me here. I played Tanti. I played Totten and Ma. I also played another minor character, I think a school teacher.
Yeah, you played Sue.
Yeah, I played Sue. Manhattan. These characters are very, very complex, especially Tanti.
Okay, we have a bit of sticking, so we'll get to Mandisa and then we'll come back. So actually, no, we go to Conrad, thank you.
Oh, hi. Good afternoon, DK. I played a variety of characters as well. Beatrice, Mikey, and Mr. Thomas and Mr. Hines.
So in terms of dealing with those characters, what were some of the things that came up for you?
Well, of course, the greatest challenge to take on was that of Aunt Beatrice, for what some may deem obvious reasons, in that, you know, this is a bit of a gender switch for me, but she is such a rich character in that, as was directed by Elisha and as is evidenced by the book by Dr. Hodge, that Beatrice is very complex in that she is saccharine on top, very thin sprinkling of saccharine sweet, with a whole depth, a multitude of these little colonialist Afro-Saxon complications that, you know, make you like her, not necessarily love her, but make you like her and hate her simultaneously. And then, of course, you had to deal with Mikey, this young man who is trying to find his way in the world in the midst of this country setting, and Mr. Hines, who is also this very Afro-Saxonist type teacher who is charged with molding the minds of young students, God help them. And Mr. Thomas, who has a very different approach as a school teacher.
And we want to get to back to Mr. Hines in just a bit, but Mandisa, let me invite you into the conversation. Thank you. Some of the roles you played, and what are some of the things that really came up, some of the things that you were thinking about while manifesting those roles?
Well, I played one character. I played T. She is the central character, and in this adaptation also plays a narrator. So she breaks the fourth wall and speaks to the audience quite often. T is a young girl who is mired in class conflict. She is pulled between these two polar opposites, between Tanti and that more rutical, for lack of a better word, and grounded home life, and then is being pulled in the opposite direction by Beatrice, who again, with these very Afro-Saxon sensibilities and this white adjacent sort of leaning. And T finds herself being pulled between these two, and it becomes very, very difficult as the book progresses, as she gets deeper into that more polished world, if you will, and the way it makes her then look upon her more humble beginnings and the relationships that she had there. And so it really is, it's just the saddest thing at the end, because she's this little girl who's being pulled between these two forces, and her identity is this sort of fluid and conflicted thing. And so that was a really interesting character to play. And I think the book in general gives a really clear picture of the class conflict of Trinidad then, and not that much is different in many ways. So it was a really powerful story, and I think this is essential reading for Trinidadians. I think it should be on every book list ever. It's a brilliant novel, and I think Elisha did a wonderful job of adapting it and pulling out the key elements to tell this story so clearly.
And we're going to talk a little more about those key elements in just a bit, but I want to know about practice for roles, the timing, how were you able to do that? But now, before you answer though, and we'll start with you, please, Elisha, as the director, but before you answer, we play this.
Then Mikey was on top of him, and they were rolling all on the ground, pounding each other, thrashing about with their arms and legs, dust flying, and everybody crowding around. And I was torn up from the ground by firm hands, propped on the bar of bicycle and propelled down the road, and abruptly deposited at my front gate to answer Tanti's questioning glare. I completely forget what Mikey promised would befall us if we ever breathe a word about him taking us down there.
And we actually see a shift change happening there, moving from, I think, Mikey to Tanti. But at the same time, Elisha, timing, practice, what was that process like during this time?
It was, of course, very different from what we usually do. You know, normally every rehearsal would be an in-person rehearsal. What we did for this was that we did some rehearsals online in the weeks leading up to when we had to film it for Bocas. And then the week of the filming, we had 2 in-person rehearsals to actually work out the blocking, which is the movement of the actors in space, and, you know, just to settle it on the second rehearsal. And then we did a run for the recording. So it was pretty much table work online and then 2 in-person rehearsals to put it in the bodies. So I'm pretty impressed with what my actors have pulled off. I'm really, really happy with being able to do this under these circumstances, because I have to admit, I did not really enjoy rehearsing online as opposed to in person, and, you know, not being able to feel things the same way did make me wonder. But in the end, I think it worked out just fine. I'm happy with the results.
And how did you decide what parts that you were going to use for this piece?
Wow. Deciding what parts I would use, parts as in not actors, but parts of the story, yes?
Yes, please.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't quite hear you, just making sure. It was a complicated process in that regard, because I knew going in that I was going to not just be adapting the novel into a script, but actually directing and mounting the staged reading, and that for the staged reading, we would only have 3 actors. So I went into it knowing that whatever I pulled out of the book would have to be able to be executed with just 3 bodies on stage. So my first pass was to look for the things that I think would give an audience the essence of the story and the characters, you know, the stuff that's most important. What does an audience need to see to really get it? And then I had to go through the stuff that I thought was important to show the audience and think about whether I could do that with only 3 people. And that then led to a lot more of this selecting process, so to speak, because there were definitely things I wanted to show an audience that in the end I had to accept that I couldn't, just because I didn't have the bodies. You know, I would be like, okay, so I'm going to show this scene, I'm going to do this, and I would start it, and halfway through I would go, oh no, but I don't have anybody to play this person. And without that, then the scene doesn't do anything for the script anymore. And I would end up having to leave out certain things because of the 3-actor limitation. I'm happy with what it did for the final product, in that I think that the limitation of 3 actors forced me to be creative in terms of what I would do to deliver the story and the characters effectively.
And we continue this,
that was definitely.
And we continue this story when we turn Crick Crack Monkey turns 50. Stay with us. We come back after this. Welcome back. We are speaking about Crick Crack by Dr. Merle Hodge. It turns 50, and there was recently a staged reading involving Isoke Edwards, Conrad Parris, Mandisa Granderson, and Elisha Bartels. Now, 50 years on, and you started to speak to it, Mandisa. 50 years on, what parallels do you see from then to now? Isoke, we didn't have as much of you as we would have liked in the first half, so we start off with you.
Lots of parallels. Nothing much has changed within the span of 50 years. The classism, the racism, you know, the way that we speak to each other and about each other really has not changed. And it's sad in a lot of ways that, you know, 50 years later, we still have to have these conversations, that these things are still plaguing our society. And not just on that level, but even surface, where the characters are concerned. I know people like Tanti, and I know people like Mike and Ma. You know, these people are, these characters are archetypes that are very local and indigenous to us here in Trinidad.
Mandisa, I see you nodding your head as though if there was a collection plate passing, it would have get some of your money.
Yeah. Something like that. Something like that, yeah. But it's true. It's true what Isoke said. You know, it's when you go through the book and you go through these characters, you realize they resonate 50 years on because not much has changed with, you know, how we relate to each other. We see it for every election period.
Oh yes.
We see it, of course, during our everyday lives. And sticking to politics a little, we see it in what politicians choose, in what angles politicians choose to attack certain issues, if you call them issues at all. So yeah, when you take into consideration certain things and you throw into that mix in the present day situation, the kind of things that we've been encountering online these days, on social media. You know, people are taking to social media as it is their own personal journal and airing out all of their feelings and letting it be known abundantly clear how they see their fellow country people. So yes, Crick Crack Monkey is visionary in that regard, in that, you know, from 1970 right down to 2020, we realize that there's still 50 years of work to do, 50 years on.
And one of the things I appreciate about the work is that Dr. Hodge didn't have a nice resolution. So, okay, well, the book going and finish, so let me fix up something, and then happily ever after the end of the book. She leaves it, and then you see it's basically still being written. But Mandisa?
Yeah, it's, again, these problems have not changed, and we've seen it, that class conflict and that division, that lack of love, empathy, acceptance between the different echelons, if you will. And we saw it, you know, on display with the protests that happened recently. And it's the way that when what we would call our underclasses, even though that's I have issues with that term, the way when they rise up with their issues, those of us who have a little more comfort have little to no empathy and very conveniently pull ourselves away and not lean into listening, to understanding, to advocating, because we are very comfortable in our comfort and would rather not be bothered by the things we don't want to be bothered by. And so that disunity that exists, that disowning of self, because we are all the same, we are all one, whether you want to see it across racial lines, or the fact that we are all Trinidadians, we're supposed to care about each other. We are supposed to want to do our best by each other because all of us are here, we're on one boat. And those conflicts, those difficult rubs still exist. So Dr. Hodge is a visionary and we have not evolved, you know, and so that book, as I say, is essential reading for us here. And I think these are things we still need to talk about. These are wounds that are yet unhealed. You know, I was just looking at some stuff earlier in the festival around the 1970s, and again, issues are still live and current. We've done work, but we haven't really done the work as a society. So there is much yet to be done. There's much yet to be done.
Okay, thank you so much. Elisha, are you a dissenting voice with the three that have gone before you?
A dissenting voice? No, I agree wholeheartedly. I think that this book brilliantly encapsulates a portrait of Trinidad, and I also believe that it should be required reading for everybody who is of this place. And I definitely also agree that we have a lot of work to do still, because we haven't evolved as far beyond the stuff that we see in Crick, Monkey as we should have. And yes, there are people doing the work, as Disa alluded to, but the people doing the work, by and large, seem to be pockets of people, and it's not happening outside of that, and it's not spreading enough. And so while work is happening, I think that as a country, as a nation, as a society, as a large community, we still have not en masse been doing that work. We have not collectively been doing that work. And a couple of small groups is not enough to get us as a people where we need to be, or at least in the direction we should be going, rather than just sitting on it, not talking about it, not resolving things, and letting everybody sit in their silos and talk amongst themselves. And then every now and then somebody jump out on social media and embarrasses themselves, and we cancel, but things don't actually change or improve, because real conversation with listening and understanding and actually genuinely trying to come to resolution isn't happening, at least not that I can see.
And one of the things,
like I say, these little groups, which is great, but not enough.
And one of the things that I appreciate is the fact that many times we may not necessarily have the total toolbox or the total arsenal to deal with situations. And I look at the stage reading that you all did, and I think of teachers and educators now who are trying to deal with online, and they find themselves in a situation. And I said we'd come back to Mr. Hines. So we actually take a piece of Mr. Hines and then come back to the end of this conversation.
I could
Go home! All of you! Go home and never come back here! You'll never get anywhere! You'll never better yourselves. You'll never be anything but pickaninnies. Here I stand, trying to teach you to read and write the English language. Trying to teach confounded pickaninnies to read and write. I who have sat on the benches of the Inns of Court. I, who have marched to glory side by side with Her Majesty's bravest men. I don't have to stand here and busy myself with little black nincompoops.
And I look at that and I think of some of the angst and the excitement that is going on Teams, Zooms, and just moving through this pandemic. But we want to thank you very much, Isoke, Elisha, Conrad, and Mandisa for joining us and sharing a little bit about what it is you were just involved in. On behalf of the entire news team, I'm DK Roster. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night.